Hello. I believe I'm back. I'm live now because I see a live icon flashing. So thank you so much to Miriam, to Raphael, to the whole team at Roshem for about blockchain, business, and human rights. And I have some slides to share to talk about the ideas. And at the end of this, I hope we will be able to have a Q&A session, and I'm open for any questions that you may have. So I'm just going to go through to my slides. Okay. So I hope that you are seeing my presentation now. And the title of this presentation is Blockchain Business and Human Rights. And I'm going to cover this in three sections. First of all, talk a little bit about the work that, or who it is that, that I am, or that we are, the Blue Number Foundation. And then on to the topic of how it is that blockchain, business, and human rights are linked and interrelated. And then some of the issues that are arising as a consequence of that, which we are dealing with, which we are trying to address in the work that we do. And then some of the work that we do and how it is that the use cases come across for blockchain, business, and human rights. So Blue Number Foundation is, we call it a foundation for new human ID. We're a nonprofit. We were started in 2015. And our aim is for everyone to have a digital ID that gives them equal opportunity and equity in a borderless world. Fundamentally, we have two beliefs. One is that the human ID is shaped by data. We have changed the entire paradigm of what identity is as a consequence of the fact that data is now ubiquitous, it's pervasive. So we're all sort of in this data pool together. And there is a lot of ambiguity, a lot of gray area about who owns it, who has access to it, what rights go with it. So our work and our programs and our convening actually look to how it is that we can help society move this forward, policies, standards, regulations that are the future. And most importantly, this work applies to people who are young and people who are in rural areas from primarily developing global South countries, because they're the ones who are being digitally included today without the baggage of what may have happened before. So a lot of us have already become vested in digital systems in the developed world. But there are people who are getting their first smartphone, who are getting their first taste of what it is to be part of the digital economy. Now, when they come in, they're coming into a world that is actually not pioneering anymore. For them, there are many services that are already available. So how is it that we would be able to ensure that they come in with the right information, with the right rights, with the right framework? And many of the actually Regeneration Summit so far have actually alluded to those issues. We talk about projects in Africa, talk about projects in India, for example, solar mums and so forth. All of these are to this idea of connecting and creating wealth for people in the digital economy in the rural South, in the global South. So as a preface to our ideas, this is what we mean when we talk about digital identity. It just means that everything has an identity now in one form or another, and there is a connection between them so that they culminate, they end up in centered around a person. So we're looking at a person-centric or a beneficiary-centric, where this to blue numbers and blockchain is that every blue number is a starting block for a blockchain. So now let's go into the issues of blockchain, business, and human rights. And sometimes we put these things together, these terms, but actually they're kind of apples, oranges, and pineapples. Apples and oranges, of course, can't compare. Well, perhaps they could. But now we want to add this third thing, which is this idea of a pineapple, which is neither here nor there, also comes probably from a different part of the world, which we may not be fully aware or familiar with. And so now we have a new fruit that we have to add into the mix. So if I take the the high level principles, what is blockchain? Okay, blockchain can be described. It's a hard technology. It's a code. It is actually built to do a specific thing, and it does only what it is built to do. So if we think about blockchain as Word, Word is a tool to write an essay, but it will not write your story. So blockchain is a tool. If we are imbuing blockchain with characteristics, as people do say, that it is more trustworthy, that it does all of these things. Yes, absolutely, it does all of those things. But what you are trying to engender trust in, what it is that you are trying to say about are not part of the blockchain itself. It actually comes from something else. Now, some of that may be answered by the question, what is business? Business is essentially the kind of catch-all label of processes which are designed and deployed between actors. And generally, business is defined by transaction. And the way that business profits, the way that business works, is that it delivers value by lowering the costs of those transactions. And any type of transaction, any type of process, any type of value, all of these terms are actually actors entering that business. So what may be of value to us may not be of value to someone else. What may be a transaction to one person should be mandatory to others. So there are actually various considerations in these terminologies which depend very much upon the formatting of the relationship between the actors. So in this case, if we look at the word analogy, if word is a tool, the business or the idea of business is how that story is formatted. But importantly, we haven't yet necessarily gotten to the story. So we have many, many types of business. But what the business actually does is really dependent upon the actors who are involved in it. So now we come to something like human rights. Now, human rights is actually, some people have been nebulous. I mean, for us who are working in the human rights arena, it is less nebulous. Sometimes we take all of these human rights and the considerations for them as being definitive, as being absolute. But actually, human rights are societal norms. They are natural laws to guide behavior between actors. However, this does require community support. And sometimes it is enforced by law, and sometimes it is aspirational. And so here, to use of technology and business, human rights are a story. They are ideally a good story that we all want. But whether it's a story or not depends upon the community, depends upon how the human rights are viewed. So I hope that in this simple table, when we put words like blockchain, business, and human rights together, we are actually trying to link apples, oranges, and pineapples. They are very, very different things to each other. And sometimes we're trying to contrive a situation that is actually very challenging for people to understand. And so on the side, what we put together is a list of modulations that affect how these three concepts or these three areas work together. So geography will change things, perception will change things. Simple access to technology will change the idea of can a blockchain be implemented? What type of business are we dealing with? Technology in that business, whether human rights are material to that business. Is, for example, modern slavery key to to that business being able to operate? Let's say the garment sector or fishing. How much trust and transparency already exists? How much trust and transparency are we seeking? What kind of participation by the different actors are involved? So these points on the side actually modulate. Looking for ideally is a situation where we can get to digital equality and data equity. These are very simple and broad ideas, but if we look at how certain actors or regions are trying to address this, Here are some guiding principles which come from a paper on the law of blockchain and smart contracts, which the EU is trying to in place in order to create a blockchain act. The EU has for many years, why they are in this discussion, but also because the EU is sitting at the forefront of what constitutes norms of global human rights. So the link between the EU's human rights agenda, the way that the EU wishes for its companies to conduct business, and ultimately how it is that it perceives natural rights, are a good bundle to explore the challenges of bringing these three things together. So here we have got guiding principles for the EU Act. And here there are 8 principles. It says, look, we first all need to know what the technology is. So we need some definition. So we need these need to have a common shared reference. We need to understand how these definitions have interpretations in law. So there are already certain conditions for blockchain to work under. There's the electronic identification, authentication, and trust services, which are look to validation of certain transactions, and GDPR, which is about protecting the position of people who have put data into a system. Both of these do not actually explicitly talk about blockchain. Blockchain needs to be codified. Next, you've got the use of emerging cases, which actually have no place in either GDPR, EIDAS, or other laws. So how do you bring laws into this discussion? You can either apply existing laws, and you can say this case actually looks like this. You can try to change existing laws because you have new emerging, and actually create new laws completely because none of the cases necessarily apply to anything which exists today. Now, whichever one you choose, you then need to go back and try to harmonize the interpretations, because if we don't do this now, then if you try to move towards anything like a single digital market, you try to enforce smart contracts, any of these things will simply not work. And I'll take a little aside here to say that a smart contract, even though it uses the word contract, is actually not a contract that is enforceable in a traditional way. Because a smart contract is simply a piece of code that says that something needs to be administered in a particular way. So there is not necessarily any underlying asset to a smart contract that you can point to and say, okay, my contract pertains to this house. I now own it. It is now part of it. It is something that is going to be respected by others with regard to trespass. So smart contracts, even though it does come across as something which is legal, is actually not necessarily legal, but is probably a tool that could enforce something which has been legally positioned in the existing law. So these are the 4 kinds of considerations on the left-hand side, with regard to legality. Now we've got some other considerations which are 5, 6, 7, 8, which is most policymakers don't really understand blockchain. What they usually think about is crypto, Bitcoin, and so forth, and all of those, unfortunately, have bucketed into some rather nefarious dealings. So we need to bring policymakers, up to speed with regard to how humans might be using blockchain. And so some of this would be in terms of high impact use cases, because there are 2, for example, very high impact considerations in blockchain. One is the idea of immutability, and then the idea of GDPR. GDPR has already been in effect for a while, so we all have to click on the accept cookies, on the do you know what this website is going to be taking from you every time you go into a new domain. So here, we've got 3 considerations in GDPR, which blockchain. One, GDPR data controllers and processes. There is an accountability aspect to that, which may not necessarily be clear when it comes to blockchain, because you can't necessarily identify who is accountable as a controller and a processor. GDPR requires a degree of anonymization. However, in blockchain, any anonymization can be undone, and at the end of the day, you can trace transactions back through some form of audit to those involved. And the third point is the right to be forgotten. Generally speaking, blockchain data cannot be undone, altered, or deleted. So this actually makes it challenging for GDPR. 7 and 8 therefore means that if you want to try to resolve all of this, you adopt a wait-and-see approach. And there has to be some kind of enlightened self-regulation that is going to take place first, especially when it comes to the idea of business and impact on human rights. And so when we look at blockchain as a regulatory tool, potentially, we need to actually get that stuck in right now, because there are certain aspects of regulations, certifications, validations, the integrity of transactions that can be audited. All of those can actually happen right now. And so we should encourage policymakers to first understand and then to start using blockchain so that they can start to enact at least those parts of the system which can already be made trustworthy or trustable. So let's from the policymaker standpoint, and that's the connection with human rights. Now we have another body of work that has been done by the World Economic Forum, which I'm presenting here, which is called the Presidio Principles. And this is a group of stakeholders that came together to talk about, well, what are the implications of blockchain for a decentralized future? Decentralized in terms of a decentralized ledger, which is what is a blockchain, and therefore the future that that might bring to us. Now, here are the tenets that they came up with. We must have transparency and accessibility. We must have accessibility. We must have privacy and security. And we must have accountability and governance. Now, why this is interesting is because all of the problems that I had highlighted in the previous slides now are manifest in this language. So if we ask about transparency and accessibility, and I apologize, it's a little small, but it says the right to influence the system. Whose system? It and then speaks about control, but control does not necessarily mean ownership, because there is a requirement for property rights. There is a discussion about security, the right to data protection, but then who is accountable for what? And that goes back to the GDPR data controller, data processor idea. And finally, it says that people have a right to understand. But FPIC is a concept that's been around for a while, free, prior, informed consent. Who is it who tests that people know what it is that they're getting into, and also how it is that they can opt out of things? Now, these are the principles, and I've just taken a couple of extracts from the document just to bring home the point within that document. Blockchain is a powerful tool, but it needs to overcome challenges, including the lack of trust and interoperability. It also needs to look at participant rights, safeguarding data, users. The interesting thing here is that the WEF looks at it almost entirely from a consumer to consumer and business to business perspective. This means that all of this comes under the transaction rights, or rights that accrue as a consequence of the transaction. Now, is this the way to understand human rights? Now, that's a different discussion, but WEF, of course, is an organization that is primarily looking at the economic implications, even though they do then get involved in other concomitant ideas, for example, climate change and social justice. But actually, the core of WEF's thinking tends to be about how it is that we can continue to sustain the economy. And therefore, the business-to-business position is most clearly articulated. I put out an article last week together with colleagues, which talk about the fact that if we bring that business idea and the blockchain to the fore, we are losing something. And what we're losing here is the fact that human rights, as they are expressed today, do not actually carry the words identity, data, internet, connectivity, or digital. And this means that anything that we currently have, which is our data and our identity, how they're used together, effectively are all the same thing. And if we do not have the connectivity or the understanding and the application to be able to access the technology that gives us that, then we effectively do not have data or identity. And this Article 31 is an article to add to the 30 articles that already exist within the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Here we have some articles from the Declaration, just to give you an idea. Article 6 talks about recognition as a person. Article 10 talks about independent impartial tribunal. Article 13 about freedom of movement and residence. Article 15 about nationality, the need to change nationality. Article 17 about the right to own property, not to be deprived of property. And Article 20, the right to freedom of association. Now, I've put into the background here, the words that we had from the previous slide. That if you're living in a borderless digital world with a digital identity that can then be used or abused or utilized by systems without your knowledge or with your knowledge, these articles are now sort of severely tested because people are now recognized everywhere and before the law of which state. People may not have the right to an independent tribunal on social. People have the right to freedom of movement and residence in the digital realm everywhere. And the idea of countries leaving and returning are almost immaterial. And we've seen that, for example, not being able to leave or to return to your country in the last 6 months has actually not curtailed the digital domain, which has actually exploded. So the right to nationality, what does it really mean anymore? The right to own property now vests in data. And the fact that people are continually and arbitrarily deprived of their data means that their right to freedom is being curtailed because they cannot get together with others. They cannot share what they wish to share. So all of these, and these are only, of course, 6 of the 30, every article is actually being compromised by this idea. So we have actually put together some principles and some rights which we hope will address these issues. And we've also got some projects to date which try to exemplify what it is that digital identity and data and so forth can be do with regard to, for example, SDG scorecards, foreign worker tracking, for traceability in supply chains and so forth. This slide deck will be available after this presentation for distribution. And I've got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to stop now and hand over for some Q&A and allow for that 5 minutes to hopefully be spent usefully. And of course, I will happily share and respond to anything that you have seen. Can I hand back to Miriam?